What up there, John? How you doing?
How's it going, guys?
Doing
Pretty
right.
good.
Good. Just remember, I'm calling over a thread of a small thing you said just to throw you guys a theist bone. So just keep that in mind. So be nice.
Okay.
We love theist bones.
There you go. So Hebrews 11:1, you guys were talking about faith, and I wanted to
Yes.
say, just to defend against the notion of what I know a lot of Christendom or people in Christendom promote this idea that faith is supposed to be lacking in evidence. But, the scripture there, it says, faith is the assured expectation of what is hoped for, the evident demonstration, and there's a little mark there, it says, or convincing evidence of realities that are not seen. And I know that verse 3 talks about by faith we perceive that system of things were put in order by God's word, which would be the logos, so that what is seen has come into existence from things that are not visible. I don't know if you guys find that inherently objectionable, but then I would say that the whole scripture there in Hebrews then ties in people of faith who actually spoke to God, or if you believe the narrative, obviously. So it wasn't a matter of having faith in God's existence or faith without evidence. They had faith that enacted them to do things. And they had the assured expectation that God would be with them. So I think that a lot of times people use this term of faith to denote a belief in something, when in reality the Bible doesn't really, a belief in the expectation, but not a belief in some invisible God that there's no reason
would
to
you say
believe in.
would you say, John, that the version of faith that you're talking about is synonymous with trust?
Trust, that's an interesting word. I suppose, yeah, I could see that point.
That's just something a lot of theists, when they point to Hebrews 11, they a lot of say, well, this is meaning to say that the kind of faith that I mean is trust. And what they're saying, they want to say that faith in Hebrews 11 is justified belief, right? It's not unjustified belief. Would you agree that there are other places in the Bible where one could where an honest believing Christian could interpret the way faith is used to mean belief in the absence of evidence? Would you believe that there are passages on either side of this question?
I guess there could be. I mean, I've actually specifically been looking for some, as it would relate to the idea of having unjustified belief.
Yeah. Right. Well, can I I just want to ask, what did Jesus say about this particular topic, about needing evidence or having or requiring evidence in order to believe in his sacrifice and to be a Christian? What can you think of any scriptures?
He said, well, because he was providing evidence then, right? If you were sitting there in the crowds, and assuming the narrative is true, he was sitting there, healing people, raising people from the dead. That was providing some sort of, for the day, somewhat empirical evidence of him being real. But he did say, happy are those that would in fact believe these things and not have to rely on these signs and miracles. Yep, he did say something to that.
Right, like Thomas, right? Like the line he said to Thomas.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, I agree. Yep.
Okay, so I mean, I'm just kind of I'm curious. Because normally a lot of theists like to prioritize what Jesus supposedly actually said about things. They normally prioritize that over, maybe some other things that are part of the theology. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just kind of curious as to how do you reconcile what Jesus says about needing evidence versus this claim about Hebrews 1 stating that, well, faith is when you have evidence and you're convinced of it.
I think that, obviously I would say that, the Gospels and some of what Paul wrote was designed to supplement evidence that what Jesus did and recorded. And I know that's highly debatable. I'm understanding your point that you'd say in turn that didn't happen and wasn't real. But I would say that the Gospels and the Bible, the Christian Greek scriptures, were written in part to convey the history of what he did. And I would say that why those people would be happy is because there is a principle in the Bible related to the more that someone is given as far as evidence, the more is going to be expected of them in return. The less that's given to them, the less in return. And so the idea would be someone that might find faith, assured expectation of the things to come, have belief in God, though they don't have as strong a reasons, maybe even than those in the first century where Jesus was doing all these miracles, they would actually be judged to a lesser degree due to that. So in some sense, there's somewhat of an equitable exchange. That's what I would, that would take a longer explanation, more scriptures, but that's,
But even that,
nuts and bolts of
but
it.
even that you're acknowledging that there's a Christian principle that says that people who believe with less evidence have some kind of advantage over people who require more evidence, right?
Well, I think it
Even
would be
by what
evidence
you
that
just
they
said.
would. Well, no, because they're then now I mean, it's a complicated theology, but I would say that now you're entering into a realm two where we have other evidences based on relationship with Him. I'm not going to go into like people speak in tongues and Holy Spirit and all that.
But even in principle,
there's a metaphysical side. There's a metaphysical side.
But none of that addresses. But sure, but you said to more who, none of that is addressed in like to more who, all that is encompassed in to more who's given, more will be required, right? So all that is encompassed in there.
Mm-hmm.
The principle, none of that changes the principle you were describing in that the people who were given less have more, are better off than the people who are given more.
That's correct. People who are given less are better off than the people given more.
Right. So that is that at least in principle sure sounds like lesser justified belief is valued.
I would say the bargain or exchange is less. How about that? And maybe I'm not wording that correctly. That's just kind of off the cusp.
But can you at least then acknowledge that there's no universal way that this faith concept is being used in the Bible? I think where I was at least going with this was that definitely there are Christians who are using faith to mean trust, like you are. There are Christians who are using faith to mean literally blind faith, and they feel like that is a virtue. Just like William, the caller, was describing, the person who's talking to them said, well, at the end of the day, you just got to have faith. Evidence doesn't matter because we're not talking about evidence. In that context, the people William were talking to were using faith to mean a lack of justification, the gap between what I can justify and what I accept.
Right. I guess I'm just trying to denote the difference between, I mean, it's not supposed to be completely evidence or lacking complete evidence. There is supposed to be some evidence for the faith that you have. And I'm saying that evidence can come, yeah. It's not completely blind faith.
But there is a gap, right? There's a gap between what you would normally accept evidentially, and you're rewarded for closing that gap with faith.
Yes. But I would say, I mean, not to derail this, but I mean, I would say that atheists have a similar, like abiogenesis. There's a certain faith that in the future that gap will be closed. I mean, so you're right. I agree. I mean,
no, there's no faith. I wouldn't describe it as faith, like the gaps that we have currently in our understanding of how life began on Earth. Like, I wouldn't say that there's faith that they'll be filled in. I think that there's substantial evidence, like in the background of scientific research, that suggests that we will in the future like understand it. Like, there have been times when we didn't understand some natural process and we slowly learned more and more and more, and so like it's proven through evidence that does actually happen. So there's no, I don't know, maybe Paul disagrees with me. I just don't see a faith component in that.
I guess for me, when it comes to abiogenesis, I don't think it requires faith to acknowledge that at one point there was no life on the earth, and that now there is life on the earth. Right? Like that's not a faith position. I don't think. You would agree at one point there was no life on the earth. So
Yes,
then
I
the
agree.
question is, so then the question is, do we have reasonable belief? Right. So right now we couldn't describe abiogenesis in a way that like we could recreate it in a lab, whatever. I don't need to have any faith in anything that maybe we will never solve it. Like that's obviously it's a historical thing, and it was a single time event. Even if we could do it in a lab, that wouldn't prove that that's how it happened the first time. Even if we could do it in a lab every single day, we couldn't prove like because it's a historical thing. Um,
Mhm.
so the only faith I'm having is my reasonable justification of, do I have reasonable justification to think that there are potential natural reasons why this could happen? And that's the extent of that of the weight that I put on that, for example. And John, I don't know if that echoes what you would think, but like my faith component, I have absolutely zero faith that anyone's going to solve it, and nothing about my life would change if tomorrow they were making uh, life forms every Monday. They have a new batch of abiogenesis. Um, Nothing about my view about God changes based on that.
Well, I would say the conclusion might not change. That would be a pretty big jump. I agree, but I guess like I'm reading right now, Neil deGrasse, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, and he says in there, and I'm not trying to impeach you with his words, but he says within a chemically rich liquid ocean, by a mechanism yet to be discovered, organic molecules transform to self-replicating life. And I mean that in going back to Hebrews, the assured expectation of something to come. I mean, he states a fact here. And again, I know these aren't your words, so
Here's the thing about his process. What if I acknowledge that God was the unknown reason that happened?
Well, or at least equally denote it, I suppose.
Well, no, but all I'm saying is like so. But Neil didn't say it was a natural thing. He said by some unknown. He acknowledged what we have evidence for was that we have prebiotic stuff and we have postbiotic stuff, and even if God did it, there was a mechanism by which God did it, right? Like this.
Well, I agree. Yeah, I agree.
So nothing about Neil's statement in any way says that that any of us are like putting any weight of what our lives. We don't make any of our life decisions based on some notion that science will eventually solve origin of life.
No, but I mean, I think there's statements of saying that it's fact, right? I mean, it's not as if he left some ambiguity to it. He says he doesn't know the reason, but he knows what's happening.
Yeah, but again, do you question that at one point there was no life and at one point there is life?
Oh no, I agree. But he says self-replicating molecules.
Well, yeah, that's because we have
the chemical.
We have evidence of. Well, I mean, we have evidence of various parts of abiogenesis, like all of the necessary components, like we've been able to show actually happen naturally. And so, like the parts, as far as I understand it, maybe Paul understands differently, but as far as I understand it, like we're missing certain sections of it, but we've got a pretty good, like a pretty clear picture of like how it would have happened in a certain way, but we can't state that we know that it happened that way. But the fact is that we know that it can happen naturally.
No, I wouldn't go that far. I would say that the problem exists we have to put the cart before the horse, and that's where Dawkins talks about the selfish gene. But then, anyhow, there's all sorts I would say that there's a sequencing problem with the DNA and all that, and what has to come before different parts.
No, but still, you understand
but in general, I think.
But again, we're Neil deGrasse Tyson at no point said any of the things that are required. He just said we know that self-replicating molecules exist in a world without life, and we now have life. What are the dots that connect? Even if God did it, then God is the. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's the part where he said the chemical part. That's right. By organic molecules, let's see, within the chemically rich liquid oceans, molecules transition to self-replicating life.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I,
Let me ask this.
yeah.
Let me ask this real quick. Can you name a process that exists now for which the only explanation for said process is God?
The only explanation, I can't do that I have things I feel, but I have no way to convey some argument that you would accept.
Okay. Well, I mean, no,
I
well,
don't know if
it doesn't matter what. Like, I don't know why whether or not I would accept it is important. What I'm trying to get across to you is that if we take a look at the explanation for how life began here on Earth, what you're proposing
Mhm.
is that there's a distinction between either God did it or some natural process happened, and regardless of whether or not we know the full process, it's still going to be like a question between God did it, which to me, in my mind, just equates to magic, but either God did it or it was a natural process that happens naturally that we can explain. And if we don't have any examples whatsoever of a natural process being explained better by adding God to it, then why should we think that the beginning of life needed God in the first place?
Well, I think if I had to answer that question, I think one of the problems would be that I agree. There's a lot of Christians and other faiths out there that almost have a magic component to it, especially young earthers. I mean, I believe in evolution. I'm not a young earther, and I believe that there's a lot of natural explanations for why things happen. I believe that God put those natural explanations into the order in which they needed to happen. And so, uh,
Okay,
I think that,
okay, let's
in the
go with
process.
that.
Yeah.
Let's go with
Okay.
that. I'm assuming you have faith in God, right?
I do.
Okay, so you called in to argue against this whole idea of faith being a lack of evidence, and so you use faith, which is a non-evidence based faith. So, does that mean that this particular thing that you believe in is backed up by evidence, or is this the faith that doesn't have any evidence?
The evidence that I would say that I have for faith is based upon a lot of the scripture in combination with the how sensical the world
Well,
is around me. I know that's very generic,
well,
but
I guess
I believe
I
that.
was specifically
Yeah.
sorry, I was specifically talking about how about your statement about God, establishing these natural processes and all that. What kind of evidence do you have to support your faith in God being the reason for those natural processes?
I would say that it comes down to the order of the processes and how well established they are, and how the innate and the organic seem to be in concert with each other. And that seems unlikely to me to have occurred accidentally or without reason.
So you're saying that basic chemistry can only occur if you add a dash of magic to it.
No, I'm saying that if you really, and I don't have the math right here. I'm an architect. I know you're an engineer. Are you a structural engineer, by the way? Just real quick.
No, I'm a computer and software engineer.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. That the math, the probability of if I'm of math of all these things being in the order in which we perceive them is it seems like the probability itself is somewhat ridiculous, and so I do
I
subscribe to
feel like
that
you don't know how
notion.
statistics works. If you're saying that, I feel like
Okay,
maybe you just don't understand statistics. I don't know. I know Paul shook his
okay.
head. Maybe I'm wrong about that assumption, but because that's just simply not how statistics works. Like if I have a set that has a trillion like items in it, and I have a 0.0000 like absurdly small percentage that I'm going to pull a specific thing out of it, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to pull that thing out of it. It just means that it's incredibly unlikely. And so I have never heard any scientists or any atheists or anybody say that, say something like, crap, I forgot where I was going with this. My point is that nobody's ever said that life is highly likely, depending on how you contextualize it. We're not saying that life is incredibly likely. We're saying that life is unlikely to happen in the universe, considering how many places we know about that life doesn't exist, and the fact that life doesn't seem to exist really anywhere near us in the universe. It seems like life is hard to form, if it does form, which it more than likely does form naturally. But so we're saying that it's incredibly unlikely for life to form, which is the exact thing that the percentage describes. If it's highly unlikely that these things would come together in the way that they do, that means that we should expect to see life be very scarce in the universe, which is exactly what we experience. So, how does the percentage of all of these things coming together and falling in line like that, how is that an argument against a natural beginning to life?
Well, going back to the percentage, when you say you haven't heard, even Dawkins in his book talks about almost like a Drake-like equation related to the chance of life, and then he relates it to the number of planets and stars and systems we have out there to create some variable to explain how, to your point, how unlikely, but it is possible. The problem that I think you run into in the probability side is that you have to prove it happened once to be able to add anything but a 0 times the probability. So you're basically running into your own dilemma, because you have to conclude and show that it can occur once, and it's not just the life. I mean, life is very robust. I agree, but it's the innate elements of. Okay.
What? Wait. Would you say? Sorry, Paul had an eye movement there.
Life happened. So I feel like the fact that we're having this conversation demonstrated that life happened once.
Right.
No, but I mean, as it relates to accidentally or without a cause, or not a cause, is not the right word, but accidentally in the sense that it just spontaneously occurred for a set of natural reasons. You'd have to demonstrate that
I feel like
without...
in my head, what happened when you described that was that, here's the earth, and then poof, life happened immediately, as if it didn't take a long time for it to develop.
Well, the long time, I mean,
we're
talking about here. Imagine all the innate things. Imagine the magnetic fields required to protect us from the atmosphere. I mean, imagine all the natural systems of water.
Right.
So your intuition.
I mean, you could go on and on and on.
But John, you understand that this is your intuition, right? Because my intuition is that this absolutely is not only happened here; it's likely happened in other places. Because in my intuition is to look at the size of the galaxy and even the Drake equations and see, like, these should be, even with, which I do not accept all the weirdness that's in that, but even in that, that this seems, to me, life feels inevitable based on the size of the galaxy. That's my intuition. You're seeming to argue, like, you're looking at these numbers and saying your intuition is, it's unlikely. But now we're just throwing intuition at each other in an entirely unhelpful way.
Well, I'm trying to answer it from the form you mentioned, Romans 1:20 earlier, and I'm trying to answer it from the standpoint of a first century person on this earth having to answer that question of why it would be inexcusable. And so there is a bit of intuition, but I would say that intuition translates into layers of probability as it relates to, like, I mean, starting from, the constants of the universe down to all the innate aspects that we need for life.
You'd have to demonstrate for me, like, you have to demonstrate to me, no one's demonstrated that the universe could be otherwise, right? Like, so again, there's this notion that we are, I don't know any cosmologists that have posit that there ever was nothing. So there's not like
I know.
If there was something, that something has properties, and if that something has properties, we don't know that any of these other these others that are fine-tuned could be otherwise. Now, maybe they could be, but it would be impossible for you to demonstrate, given that the only universe we can observe is one. So I'm going to be like incredibly unimpressed by this notion that, well, the gravitational constant is this way. Well, it's like, well, could it have been otherwise? Maybe not. In which case, then it's like every universe that was going to pop up had this gravitational constant, right? Or strong, weak electrical force. Go ahead.
Yeah. Except I would say too, though, some of the multiverse theories. I mean, those are generated from that problem, right? I mean, a lot of that is related to the fact of trying to explain how it is,
right? Because
because
it is people's intuition that this seems unlikely. But that's still correct. All that it is. Like the people. So, but you understand that my intuition is not that, and lots of people's intuitions aren't that. So, like, intuitions are a weird way to argue.
Well, it's not but it's not just intuition. I would say that there is, and I don't have it right in front of me, so obviously I don't have every book open in front of me. But I would say there are probability ratios that are statistical. To your point, statistical numbers that are quite problematic over the layering of all these things put together into a coherent theory, which which is exactly why this multiverse and
hold on. Since we're moving back to probability here, maybe we can recontextualize this. That's not like God kind of centered. There is in poker. Do you play poker?
I have. I don't play it a lot, but I have.
Okay. So there's this one hand called a royal flush, and that's when you get all the same suit from 10 to ace, right? And it's the best hand that you can get in poker. And it's got a 0.000154% probability of being made in a hand of poker, right? So this translates to once out of every 600,000 for 600,000 for 649,740 is what it ends up like. It occurs once in that many amount of time. So does that mean that it will never come up?
No, it'll come up.
Okay. When you quote me a percentage of like a probability of life developing naturally on its own, unless it is 0%, then it has a chance of developing naturally. And if you think about the number of chemical reactions that happen every second or happen, every year or whatever, like if you think the amount of chemical reactions that are happening, even in just one place, like on a primordial Earth, what do you think the likelihood is, given the percentage that you've been quoting of life developing naturally, given that immense set? What's the likelihood of it happening once?
Right now, the scientific number is 0 because we can't prove it. I mean, we can't prove it happened. Yeah, because
what source are you getting that from? Because you've been quoting.
We can't get it.
Well, you've been quoting actual percentages, and you've never said that it's 0% likely. You said some incredibly small number percent likely, which means that it's incredibly unlikely, which is exactly what we're saying.
There's no question that the math on statistics gets a bit skewed because people add a likeliness to anything. Right. I mean, I think even Dawkins even quote some ridiculous example of that.
But now you're saying that there's a 0% chance of life developing naturally.
Well,
what's your evidence for that?
I'm saying scientifically right now, there's a 0% chance that chemicals can turn into self-replicating molecules. 0. We have no evidence of it.
What is your evidence for that? Or what's your source for that?
Well, I would say Dawkins himself, but I'm sure there's another professor.
Does Dawkins say somewhere that there's a 0% likelihood of life developing naturally? I kind of feel like that's antithetical to the biological work that Dawkins has actually written about.
Well, Dennis Noble is another one right now that in fact, I'm reading his 2023 book. I would say that what they're saying is that there is no evidence they agree that there is no evidence. They may put a statistical value on it, but right now, scientifically, if you were to just like if roles were reversed here, and you were the theist and I was the atheist, and we were talking about completely different things, you would say, well, there's zero evidence for this. There's zero evidence.
I would never say that.
Self-replicating.
No.
Okay.
I would never.
Right.
There's not zero evidence for anything.
There's no scientific. Okay.
There's a lot of scientific evidence that supports abiogenesis, though.
Zero scientific. No, but there's zero scientific evidence that self-replicating life can come from chemicals. That's the full statement.
I mean, I don't know where you're getting that from, but there's several, like the Miller-Urey experiment shows how amino acids can be produced in a without any kind of like outside influence. So I mean, that's evidence of it. There's also scientific studies that show self-organizing chemicals and stuff like that. So I mean, I'm not claiming to be an expert in this field or anything like that, but I do know enough about it that there are, like, we have the individual pieces that show that abiogenesis is likely to have happened naturally without the need for magic.
Well, it's going back to my original point. It's a cart before the horse problem right now. Yes, there's some.
It's really not.
In fact, they use the term crystallize. It is, because it's the self-replicating part. It's the DNA part. That's where the element.
No, right? You understand that self-replicating and wait. You understand that self-replicating and DNA are not synonymous, right?
No, you need the. No, it is synonymous. In fact, you need the DNA to replicate correctly, or it will fail. I mean,
do you think DNA replicates correctly now?
No,
do you think that there are no replication errors in DNA now?
Do I think there are no replication errors? If there are, no, I don't think there's enough to direct the cell.
I would like for you to go research RNA.
Okay.
Because RNA is replicating, but it's not DNA. So okay. We don't have really. John and I. You should definitely call in when Forrest or somebody's on. But there definitely is replicating, like those replicating chemical processes that scientists are calling replicating. That maybe if you are assuming that what Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying was that they go straight to DNA, then I get understand what you're thinking the disconnect is. But all they were saying was replicating, and there are definitely proteins and RNA that we can in labs get to at least a replicating process. That's why they were so confidently saying we can get stuff to replicate. But no one. I'm hoping you weren't reading that anyone was saying that life jumped, that they went straight to DNA, because not the claim on the table.
Okay.
And then, when it comes to all those other constants, again, you'd have to demonstrate that an alternate universe is even possible, for me to care about those numbers. But I wonder if we can wind this all back to faith. So I was actually saying, like, even if we're showing abiogenesis in the lab every Monday, we're making new life forms every Monday. That's just the thing that we suddenly live in a world that people are doing that. I don't think Christianity would stop, and I don't think atheism would stop. Like, it's not a linchpin, because I know a lot of theists would just say, well, now we've shown one possible way God did it. Like, that's all, and that's what just keeps happening, right? Like, so they used to think that thunder was caused by gods. Well, now we understand that it's not. But now, every Christian would say, well, yeah, that's how God makes thunder. Like, that's the natural process that we understand now. So it's not the same.
I think it would affect the personalized aspect of God, right? I mean, there would be a little bit of a hit there.
Why? Right? I know Christians now who think that God absolutely wound up the singularity, whatever that means, in an exact precise way, and that actually shows better evidence of design, that he was able to wind up a singularity that would get that outcome he wanted rather than constantly intervening. Like that God, the God who can do it in one shot is actually the better God than the God who has to keep stepping in. Oh, well, now you're on water. I guess I should make you stand upright. Like some people do think that God intervened with evolution at certain key steps. But there are definitely theists who think that it was all one shot and God was smart enough to wind the clock in exactly the right way. So again, I don't honestly believe that it would affect even that personal nature or even the specialness of it, right?
I mean,
Like even if we were
right. Yeah, even Darwin was not an atheist, right? So I mean, he
right. So
believed
like
the Cambrian explosion and all that.
Back to our other calls, like I don't think that answering these questions from science has never destroyed Christianity or any other religion before. So I don't know why this one would. And I also don't know why, weirdly, that you are wanting to. I want to rewind back to like why you were conflating that John and I are kind of in this place where it seems like maybe one day like that a natural process seems plausible, but that doesn't actually affect the theist question. So I don't understand why us kind of erring on the side of, well, it seems like God isn't required, is equivalent to what you were advocating for, which was that that it's a virtue to live your life with certainty on a little gap there, because you're definitely putting forth this God as a certainty in your life, or at least you're living your life very much as if it's true. That you're trying to equivocate those things. Do you see where I don't quite see that those are the same? Like John and I are not in any way making any decision in any of our day based on whether or not abiogenesis was a natural or a theistic process.
Yeah, and I was using that more as it was more of a side argument related to a statement of faith, in the scientific world. But to my original call, obviously, it's the faith being the shared expectation, with evidence, as Hebrews 1:11 mentions. I was trying to defend against the idea that faith had to be.
Okay, so are you arguing that Christians who use faith in any kind of gap between evidence and conclusion, are you saying that all Christians or any theist who uses faith that way is using it wrong? Is that what we should say? If next time someone calls up and says that, we said, you know what, John called in on May 19th and he said that you're doing it wrong. Is that your position?
Well, I would say that someone's inside of or I just to say someone a theist would be it would be based on theological discussion, which starts from the premise that God exists, versus a philosophical discussion of religion, right? I mean, so I would say that you're starting with the idea that God exists, and the faith is the assured expectation of the things that He promises. It's not necessarily supposed to be about faith that God exists. You're almost supposed to know that God exists, and faith is coming from the things that He promises and that He says. So that's the unique qualifier on faith I think I was trying to get across.
It sounds to me like you've got to first believe in God in order to have faith in God. Is that, maybe I was misunderstanding what you were describing there? It just sounds like you've got to believe first and then faith comes later.
Right. Faith used as Paul uses it isn't related to, you're not faith that God exists. That's not, I would say, a right use of faith. Faith that what he said will come true is the way that the scriptures talk about it.
You understand that presuming that God exists with no evidence is what we're saying is blind faith.
That's what I hear you. I understand that, but I'm saying that if you look at the Bible writers, they all come from the position that God exists. They're not questioning. There's not a lot of chapters in the Bible, pontificating whether or not there is a God or not, right? I mean, it all starts from the source that He exists, and then goes from there.
Okay.
Okay, so it doesn't. I'm now actually more confused about what your call was supposed to be about, because you're sounding a little bit presuppositionalist almost, right? Right now you're willing to say I absolutely beg the question that you're placing your God there first, and you're also saying that the gospel writers did that. Is a Christian correct or incorrect? My question was going to be: is a Christian incorrect or by using faith that way? But it seems like you're just saying that when it comes down to it, that's what you're doing as well. Am I wrong? Are we wrong? Are we crazy?
Well, no, or maybe I didn't understand. I mean, or we're talking past each other, perhaps. But I called in specifically related to the idea that faith. There was no evidence required for faith, and my point is that biblically, evidence is tied in with the definition of what faith needs to be.
Okay,
but the confusing part would
be. But you would
be
agree that there are people in the world who use the word faith to say, I accept a conclusion that has no evidence. Like that there are just people walking around
yes, I do.
saying that
Yes.
faith is their
Yes,
reason. Okay. So, and I'm saying now, am I allowed to now say to everyone who calls in with that, every Christian, say, no, John on May 19th called in and said that you're using faith wrong?
Well, I read.
Are we allowed to say that?
Exactly what faith. Well, I'm not the authority here, but I'm saying that there's a scripture here that I read that is the definition that Paul used for faith.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess if, as a qualifier to that, if the person believes that what Paul wrote is true, then I suppose there would be evidence that they might be using faith incorrectly pursuant to his view of faith.
Okay. So would you agree then that if two people are using the same word, but they're using different definitions of that word, that they're not actually talking about the same thing?
I think that it could get confusing as you use scripture in concert with the term faith, not using it correctly. But I agree that.
No, I mean any word in general, just any word in the world.
Yeah.
Like, so let's say I am using the word red to indicate a color,
mm-hmm.
and you're using the word red to indicate that you looked at words and understood them in the past. Those are both, we can say that, weirdly, that was maybe a bad example because they're spelled differently, but there's different words you can conflate the meaning, right? Like that's just a weird thing about language. But that ultimately they're not describing the same thing. So when we are addressing someone like the caller William, who was dealing with people who absolutely were just saying that faith to me means X, means this blind faith with no evidence, we're still we're justified then to point out that is a bad epistemology, right? Like we don't have to reference them to John on May 19th as saying, well, there's a different way to define that word. That's irrelevant because they're expressing.
Okay, but this would be more similar. Let's say we had a contract or a report or some paper on, and it was using the word, and inside that paper or that contract, there's the definition of the word specifically noted so that to avoid that confusion. I guess what I would say in turn, I'm referencing Hebrews 1:1-3, that specifically states what faith is, and that should be the guidance or the point at which a Christian, at least, should use the term because it's explicitly
okay. So this is why I'm saying we're not going out. Mm-hmm. John and I, as atheists, aren't going out and telling people what their definition of faith should be. They call us, They talk to us, and we say, "What definition of faith do you use?" And we will go by it. Notice that neither John or I on this call told you that you're using faith wrong. Mm-hmm. We're saying, hey, you go ahead and define when you're talking about faith, what do you mean? But in the earlier call with William, the person was self-identifying faith as a whole different thing. So I don't know why mm-hmm. John and I are supposed to be the Christian police when a Christian is self-identifying using faith in one way, that it's our job to tell them that they should be using faith a different way. It seems like this is an in-house thing that maybe the Christians should get together on and figure it out.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree with you. Everything you're saying is very logical.
All right.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Because all we can do is when we ask someone what they mean by faith and they say, that means I don't need evidence to accept this. Well, then we just have to work with what they're giving us.
Nope, I agree. And keep in mind, I was looking for a reason to call in. I was just trying to find some reason.
Oh, well, perfect. Now, so let me ask, did you enjoy this conversation?
I did a lot. I did a lot.
Okay.
All
right. Well, I
I'll
hope that
probably
we
listen
were.
to it again. I'll listen to it again just to make sure that what I said was mostly right. Hopefully, I didn't say too many errors. So
well,
I'm sure I did.
What I want you to do now is you go look up RNA and definitely call in.
Okay.
And if we were wrong about RNA, even if John and I aren't on, you can say, well, Paul and John said that RNA did this and they were wrong because X, Y, and Z. And I can't wait for that call. So please do that, especially if
there you go.
If one of the scientists is, well, we have scientists on the channel who are very active. I'd love to hear that. And sorry, John, I monopolized the end of that one.
No, have a good night, guys. I appreciate the time.
Yeah. Thank you so much, John, for calling in.
Thank you. Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I got it in rant mode.
No, that's fine. I went back and I looked at Hebrews 11, 1-3. And I mean, there's a lot of different versions of it, but like, I don't know. I don't know which version he was reading, but it doesn't seem like, to me, it just reinforces the whole, faith without evidence thing.
So actually, no, you're right. We didn't let him, I jumped ahead because to my own Christian rationalization of this chapter. Because the way I rationalized it as a Christian was, yes, verse 1 says assurance of what we do not see. But then the whole rest of the chapter is basically a summary of the Old Testament. And I think that if you want to be the most generous about saying, well, yes, you shouldn't read a single Bible verse. You should read passages, right? Because Bible verses didn't exist when they were writing this. I get why, as a Christian, you want to say, well, all these other verses rationalize, give examples of a different kind of faith than what is expressed in verse 1. So how do you reconcile that? To me, that's just one of these weird things. Like, your book is broken because it's saying two things right side by side. So, but
yeah, I don't know. Like, I see, like, apparently the KJV, NLT, CSV, NASB use proof and evidence, but the ESV uses conviction of things not seen, which I don't know if that's too much different than evidence, but it just, I don't know. It seems like a weird hair to split.
Hello, I'm Jimmy Snow, executive producer of The Line, and I only became a woodworker for the puns. That's not important. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so on our Patreon or as a channel member, and you can actually support specific shows and specific hosts in special tiers on those. Check those options out. Also, you can leave a super thanks and get a little highlighted deal. But if all else fails, you can always you can subscribe and leave a comment. Now, here are some suggestions because I don't care about the algorithm. I am the algorithm. Bye.